Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford sat down with one of the fastest rising stars in the Republican Party, Representative Brandon Gill. Here's Chris with more.
I'm here with Congressman Brandon Gill, the new congressman from Texas, and I believe the youngest sitting congressman right now, elected Republican and a friend of the show. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, you've hit the ground running. We've had the opportunity to come by your office and talk a little bit about policy, and you've already had it out with hosts on CNN, and you've gone back and forth with my old hometown senator, Ed Markey from Massachusetts. And the subject of all this debate seems to be how much taxpayer money is going to NPR and going to PBS. Tell what brought you here to come to Washington, D.C., and in your first few weeks start throwing things around the China shop?
Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on. The American people are sick of funding left-wing institutions and media outlets that promote values that are repugnant to them. They're sick of $500 million plus going to NPR and PBS so that they can promote either transgenderism or so that they can bash Republicans and systematically run cover for Democrats. You know, defunding NPR and PBS is something Republicans have been talking about for decades. I can remember whenever I was younger reading books about how biased these media outlets are. And of course, whenever Democrats want to dole out taxpayer dollars to these outlets and Republicans want to take it away, of course these outlets are going to be bashing our side. I think it's time that we actually allow these promises that we have been making to the American people to materialize, that we actually defund these outlets because they are working against the American people and taxpayers are sick of it.
So you know what they're going to do, because Republicans got close to this previously. And what they did is they brought Big Bird and Elmo down to Capitol Hill. And, Big Bird's actually pretty big in person. And he gets that name for a reason. Scared the heck out of these lawmakers who are going to go after it. What's changed since? Why do you think you can get Republicans to sign on and actually move on something? And, you're quickly learning how little Republicans actually like to do.
Well, I think that there's a couple things that have changed. One is that we have a tiny majority right now. We have about a 2-seat majority in the House. And whenever you think of $500 million funding left-wing media outlets that are bashing our side of the aisle, and you think of these swing seats on the margins that could either flip from Republican to Democrat, that one side or the other is going to win by only, in some cases, a few hundred votes, the activity that we are funding through our tax dollars at NPR or PBS that is running cover for them and bashing us, that could actually be what flips some of those seats to the Democrats. And I think Republicans are realizing that. We fight tooth and nail to keep a majority in the House, and we cannot use that majority to fund our enemies on the other side of the aisle. So I think that more and more Republicans are realizing that. I think there's a second issue here, too, which is that NPR and PBS have gone so far to the left. This isn't, Big Bird, Sesame Street from the 80s and 90s that's teaching young kids how to read and about basic civics. This is left-wing indoctrination. This is promoting, cartoons that are going and taking part in LGBTQ pride parades. This is pushing a radical left-wing agenda on young children. And regardless of where you are in the Republican conference, I think it's hard to say that is an appropriate use for American taxpayer dollars.
So what would well, actually, first of all, let's talk about those taxpayer dollars, because these companies, they like to pretend that they don't really even need the taxpayer money, that they're all privately funded by different foundations. You'll see them listed. They try to say that it's only a small percent, but then you kind of get a glimpse of how existential a crisis it would be to take it away when you threaten to take it away. And they say, well, then you just ruin our program. It'd be all gone. It'd be destroyed. So where's the truth? How much money is actually going to it? And are they hiding how much it is, or are they just trying to obscure the facts here?
It's funny. Their argument is basically, we don't need the money, but make sure you don't take it away or we're going to have to close down. If they don't need the money, then they shouldn't have any concerns about us pulling the plug on them. But the reality is, taxpayers fund about a third of NPR and PBS's budget. It's just over $500 million that they get. And this is from a variety of sources. This is from grants directly from the federal government. This is from grants that flow through state governments. But ultimately, it's about $500 million that taxpayers are on the hook for. So this is a huge part of their budget, and they know it, and that's why they're so scared. That's why they brought out Big Bird the last time we tried to defund them. So I think that they know that they need taxpayer dollars, and the American people have really had enough of this kind of stuff.
Now, if I recall, I may be mistaken, but one of your predecessors from your district, Dick Armey, was involved in that fight. I remember him being pretty vocal, though it has been, almost 20 years. So what would defunding look like? There's a couple of different bills floating around Congress. Some have been proposed by some of your colleagues. Which is the correct tactic for moving forward?
You know, there's a couple different ways we can approach it from the appropriations process. We can approach it by a broader bill that stops funding directly to these entities or stops funding from left-wing media more broadly. So there are a few different tactical approaches we can take. But the key thing here is getting every Republican on board, which I think they will be, and really making a big issue out of this. The American people are so tired, and we're seeing this through Doge and every single day. They're so tired of funding left-wing institutions. We've seen over the past few weeks that so much of the left's institutional ecosystem, their political infrastructure, only exists because it's taxpayer funded. In other words, it wouldn't exist if it weren't for that. Ask yourself, 2 years ago, whenever the left was trying to tell you that men can get pregnant or that our borders were secure, would they have been able to even make that case, these absurd claims, if they weren't on the taxpayer dole? And I don't think that they would. I think it would have been much harder for them to do that. And I think the American people recognize that. We have got to stop funding the other side of the aisle. And we're doing that whether it's through left-wing media or left-wing NGOs that are facilitating open borders, or through pseudo-health organizations that are promoting studies in transgenderism all over the globe. We have got to take our country back. And we've got to rationalize where American taxpayer dollars are going.
Now, I think the in-kind contributions to campaign commercials is something that would even push Republicans in the early 2000s. And even though you're new to Capitol Hill, you've long been a student of politics, which is how you got here in the first place. Do you think that the courage of Doge are you sensing that that's contagious on Capitol Hill? Because for decades we've known that the taxpayer money is funding left-wing NGOs. We've just known that, and there's never been any kind of a spirit or a willingness by Hill Republicans to do anything about that. That's just a part of the appropriations process. They stamp it, they move it along, they get the money for the Pentagon, and they don't really care if they fund the domestic insurrection. Is that starting to change? Are people really talking about this? Because I know that in his interview last night, President Trump talked about wanting to make sure that some of his Doge cuts were legislated on. What's the chatter on Capitol Hill?
Well, first of all, the president's exactly right. What Doge is doing and what Elon Musk are doing has been great, but Congress has to provide them with legislative backup to make sure that these cuts are permanent. But one of the things that you referenced there is correct, and that is that what we've seen over the past few weeks is things that we've sort of known about but didn't know all the details. We knew our money was being laundered internationally, but we didn't know the extent of it. We didn't know exactly where it was going. So, for instance, it is new information to us that $2 million are spent on transgender surgeries in Guatemala, or $50 million on DEI scholarships in Burma, or $500,000 promoting atheism in Nepal. That's a level of transparency that we have never had before, that we have thanks to President Trump and the Doge movement. And what I would ask my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is this. Doge is entirely about providing transparency and accountability to our federal budget and stopping and rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. That's it. That's all that they're doing. So if you are against Doge, you are necessarily in favor of our taxpayer dollars being laundered all over the globe. So I'd simply ask them if they would like to defend transgender surgeries in South America or DEI scholarships on the other side of the globe. I welcome them to. Please explain to the American people why their taxpayer dollars should be funding these left-wing political projects. I don't think they will, but I would love to see it because that is the position that they are taking here.
And while they've always been happy to defend it, the strange thing is Republicans have not usually been willing to attack it. I think that kind of feeds into the American feeling of empathy and the libertarian spirit where it's, let them do their thing. But something has changed over the last couple of years, the change in sports, the change in Hollywood, the change in parents and then the surgeries for children. This previous election was the first election where men and women's sports and other issues like that actually had an impact, a notable impact. The president ran on it. Do you see an appetite amongst your fellow congressional Republicans to actually have this as a motivating factor, or is there still that fear of being seen as punching down?
No, and I think that what we've seen is for the past several years, the other side, it's become very clear that the other side doesn't just want to live and let live. They don't want to just live their own lives and have everybody else leave them alone. They have actively tried to shove their ideology down the throats of the American people. It impacts everyday Americans whenever you go to watch your daughter's basketball game, for instance, and the girls on her team are all getting beat up by a boy who wants to tell everybody she's a girl, or that you have to worry about whether a man in a dress is going to go in your daughter's locker room, or whether illegal aliens are going to come into your community and murder and rape you or your family, or whether fentanyl that's being poured across the border is going to poison and murder another child at your kid's school. Everything that the left has been pushing now impacts everyday life. They're not just trying to promote, an LGBT agenda for those who want to partake. They're wanting to promote drag shows at your children's elementary school. I think at some point the left has sort of overplayed their hand here. They pushed things so far and they can't pull it back. And the American people realized it and they revolted against it. They said, we don't want these perversions that you've been pushing on us. So I think that has created a movement to say, we don't want transgenderism being pushed on us. We don't want abortion being taught in our schools. We don't want all of these weird woke things, and we actually are going to fight back against it. And that has created, I think, the political will for Republicans to finally root this waste out of our federal budget. I think Elon Musk has done a really, really good job as well, which is identifying and highlighting some of these egregious areas that our taxpayer dollars are going to. And, it's really difficult to argue against them.
It is. It turns out he's a pretty smart guy, actually. Congressman, I know you're pretty busy, so this is one last question. What does the process look like for getting other Republicans aligned behind a single effort and pushing that through on actually fulfilling this longtime boogeyman of defunding NPR and company?
Well, listen, what we're going to start by doing is exposing what NPR is doing, and a lot of the work's already been done. We just need to highlight it and show the rest of the Republican conference. Here are examples of NPR, PBS attacking Republicans in swing districts to the degree we may have lost seats because of what these taxpayer-funded institutions and state-sponsored media is doing to us. Here are the values that they've been propagating that you find repugnant, that your voters find repugnant. Here's how they're working against the American people. And then we will use that. I think that would gin up a lot of political will, to put it kindly, to get rid of these institutions. And then I think we can work that through the legislative process, whether there's something we can do in reconciliation or whether that's through the formal appropriations process. We'll work through those details. But I think right now it's a matter of exposing where our money has been going and building up the political will to get rid of it.